that are often at the center of the dispute. Now let me give you a couple of examples from climate change. Climate change is a civilization-challenging ethical question. It must be understood as an ethical problem. It's a problem where some people are hurting other people. Okay, it's a problem where the harms to the people that are being harmed are not mere inconveniences, they're catastrophic. They're matters of life and death. It's a problem where the victims can't petition their governments to protect themselves. The victims don't have a remedy in their governments. They have to hope that the people causing the problem will see that they not only have economic interests, but they have duties and responsibilities and obligations to the victims. So climate change is an amazing civilization-challenging ethical question. And there are numerous ethical questions when you start to do policy on climate change. Okay, so on the one hand, it's obviously an ethical and moral problem. However, there's been a 35-year debate in the United States and other countries about what we do about climate change. That debate for 35 years never mentions ethics. It never mentions duties. It acts as if governments simply can act on the matter of self-interest. My government for 30 years has acted as if ethics are irrelevant. So the argument is carried out in value-neutral languages, science and economics in most cases, okay? So the debate has been about science, okay, not ethics. But you can't do science without making ethical assumptions about cause and effect. Who should have the burden of proof? What quantity of proof should satisfy the burden of proof? Scientists, IUCN, are usually extremely inarticulate about the ethical assumptions of what they're doing. Okay, they've not been trained to identify the ethical issues. At the core of science are ethical assumptions. Most scientists use, for instance, a 95% confidence level before they can make a claim of cause and effect. Where did the 95% confidence level came from? It was made up by a statistician in the 1930s. Human problems would require different statistical tests depending upon what's at stake. If I had a scientist saying, as they did, that they were going to create a black hole that could consume the entire universe, you would not want 95% confidence levels. You would want 99.999% confidence levels. I suspect at the heart of your controversy here with this naval base is confusion about science and ethics. There was an EIS been done here locally. My guess is that the EIS is, in fact, very, very poor. Okay. And it's very, very poor because people are confused about what science does in many cases. The dirty little secret in environmental policy is that decision makers often have to make decisions in the face of uncertainty. There may be real environmental impacts that were not included in the EIS because the scientists think they can't say anything until they have certain statistical levels of confidence. But ethics would say that who should have the burden of proof before you start to talk about the consequences. This is an ethical problem. It's not a scientific problem. Who should have the burden of proof? When should you be able to identify potential impacts and have a public conversation with them? So one of the reasons why we're so incredibly bad about the ethics is because we use expert languages of science and economics that are full of very, very controversial ethical assumptions. I've talked about science. I could talk for the next half hour about controversial ethical assumptions in economic analysis. How is it valued? Can you simply do a cost-benefit analysis? Are there questions of distributive justice? Have the victims been consulted, the economists consulted the victims about how they value things? So my point is that the technical ways that we frame questions, in fact, the very thing that IUCN does, is often full of ethical assumptions that are not necessarily wrong, but they need to be made visible. Okay, they need to be transparent. They need to be opened up to ethical discourse. So ethics is the key. If we're going to do what Ron wants us to do, we need social movements where we make the ethical dimensions of controversy such as you not hidden in dense technical language, but visible to public so it can be debated. And let me just end by saying that people are afraid of ethics because there are different ethical systems. There's utilitarian systems and rights systems. If you identify the ethical questions, you can get three things happen. One is we may disagree what ethics requires. That's a possibility. Another possibility is we actually agree what ethics requires. In the case of climate change, when you start to identify the ethical issues, there appears to be universal consensus that people should not kill other people because of their economic interests. There's a whole host of issues that you can actually agree despite different cultural systems. And therefore, the failure to spot the ethical issues is tragic. And the third possibility is we may not agree what ethics requires, but we may all agree that the positions of governments, like my government, the United States, are ethically troublesome. No ethical system would condone it. So not spotting the ethical issues eliminates the possibility of knocking out of consideration solutions that almost pass minimum ethical scrutiny. So let me end by saying, I suspect if I knew more about your problem, we would be able to find a lot of really hidden ethical assumptions in the debate, and that scientists are usually awful about identifying. Not all scientists. And so I'm honored to be with you and hope to continue to work with you more on this problem.
It's with great esteem and honor that I now welcome Dr. George Rabb, an honorary IUCN member and former chair of the Species Survival Commission. Dr. Rabb.
I'm pleased to be with you to consider caring in another context, because the ethical principles must be expressed in behavior. That behavior, in my view, is caring. Conservation is caring. And I gave such an account to the Council of IUCN on behalf of the Biosphere Ethics Initiative that Patrick Blandin and others launched a few years back. But what I put up here, sorry it's not on the screen, what I put up here are the dimensions of caring, the considerations in caring. One part is rationality. What are we truly talking about and why? Caring that. But most of us respond in terms of other beings, other things, other places. We respond in terms of caring about the emotions, the attachments to other beings, to other places, to other things. And finally, if we care about, if we care that, we must then respond. Our ethical responsibility is to care for that is conservation. And the dimensions that we have to deal with are multiple. I don't know whether you can make out that, that screen, but going from oneself to the outside, there are at least 3 dimensions in terms of caring for. One, in terms of what's been loosely termed biophilia, that is, love of the biological world, the rest of the world. Starting with close attachments, say, to pet animals or plants, and going on then to particular other creatures, all the way to the level of all species. Another dimension you're all familiar with in terms of a home place you care about, your neighborhood, your community, and on to the entire world, to the environment of the world. The third dimension is what we might call sociophilia, the anthropocentric dimension that Patrick alluded to, in terms of starting with family, friends, etc., going to all people. Katie has suggested that there's a 4th dimension. If we really care, we care for those other things, we have a sense of ecophilia. That is, we love ourselves if we love these other creatures, if we care for these other places, other beings, other people. So this is in brief what caring is about. What we know is that, and you see by the dimensions of the arrows, very, very attenuated as we go further out on the axes. That is, there's diminishment in the caring for components as we reach larger, higher levels, more expanded levels. This occurs both in terms of time and in terms of distance. And we have to recognize this, even as we think we've got it all together in a global picture. That is not the case. We simply must relate at the local level, and we're being witness to that right here. But I'll give you another dimension in terms of my particular interest in the natural world, in terms of concern for other creatures. And in this case, it was a ethical dialogue on the relationships of wild animals, in this case a major predator, the wolf, in respect to its position in the upper Midwest of the United States. And we held a meeting with diversity of wildlife managers, etc. But we had also in our presence an Ottawa Indian. And at the end of the entire 2-day meeting, he got up and with a little hand drum, he played a 500-year-old song. 500-year-old song about his tribe's relation with the wolf. And essentially, the song is about the wolf as a person who therefore deserves fair treatment, the basis of ethics. And is this a model for our relations to all species? And we were all stunned to have this representation from an indigenous culture saying what we should respect if we have decent ethical relations with this creature. And what I'm suggesting is that we should apply this both to places and other people. beg your indulgence when I comment that in the recent issue of the journal Nature, a major scientific journal, there is a piece about the proposed intergovernmental platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services, the IPBES. And in it, it suggests that not only scientific knowledge is required, but also very much the experience of local peoples, local knowledge of what should be conserved, what should be with us forever. And I highly recommend that you look at this August 23 very short commentary about listen to the voices of experience, and we will be listening very shortly to the experience that we've had in terms of the relatos around the world and right here on Jeju. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabin. I'm not sure how many of you were here for the welcoming speech by President Kosla, but when he referred to an ethic of care, this is the man he got that from. So I hope that it is spread widely and continues to spread widely throughout the foundations of IUCN. Bearing witness to injustices, fair treatment, respect, love is the basis of ethics. I would like to now call upon our next session so we can learn about some of the past relatos that have taken place and share their stories. Let me just go back if I could. So if the session 3 panelists could please come up to the table. I'm sorry this is not easier up here. I only have a clicker instead of a keyboard. Yes, Dr. Omar, could you please come up? And I'll get it myself. All right. And beginning would be Dr. Laurel Ross of the Chicago Wilderness. She is the Director of Urban Conservation of the Field Museum and the former chair of Chicago Wilderness, our very first relato.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here. And as we've done in all of our relatos, we'll each tell you a little story about the place that we work. I work in the city of Chicago in the US, in Illinois. Great big region with 10 million people right near one of the Great Lakes with immense amount of fresh water in the world. And let's see if I can figure this out.
It's not easy.
It's always say again?
Yeah.
All right. So, Chicago Wilderness was the first relato, and what is Chicago Wilderness? You're probably asking yourself. It's a place-based partnership where we are trying to connect the people of that region, the 10 million people of that region, with the biodiversity of that region in a way of value to both of them. And at the time we did our first relato, which was 2007, I don't think we'd ever used the word ethics. Ron and others came to us and proposed a conversation about it. We've already been working for 10 years to try to restore some of the damaged ecosystems and to try to get that message out to all the people of the region, the value of those natural resources to them and their own value, of course, to themselves. And so we had an interesting conversation. I'm also, so what do I do to actually advance it?
If you just click on the screen or the...
On the screen,
Or the... Sorry.
Sorry to be
No, it's not easy. I believe it's
this way. Okay.
Go
Excellent.
forward.
So, because we've had a number of relatos after that, I wanted to just make the point that, so a relato is a few days, or in the case of today, 2 hours, where we do something in an intense way, but it doesn't stop with that. So I wanted to also make the point that the relatos that followed Chicago have also had an impact on the work that we're doing, and I will mention a little bit what the Jordan relato, how that relates to what we're doing in Chicago. So there's a report on our work in Chicago, and I pulled this sentence out: Chicago wilderness showed us the ability of a powerful story told passionately to change minds and open hearts. And it was an interesting experience for us because we had never told our story to each other before. And so I hope in our experience today, as we tell the story of the relato of this place, that we will learn, even those of you who are in the story, you will learn by hearing your story told to each other, and that our response will help you hear about your story. It certainly was the case with us. I'm showing you these pictures because these are some of the people that participate in our Chicago Wilderness effort. We have created many documents over our 16-year partnership. We have a plan for biodiversity recovery. We have an atlas. We have many communication tools. We have a green and blue vision for our region.